as Stephen said, what we are trying to do at the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden is to establish a certain understanding of economic science as related to the Belt and Road Initiative, because there is a lot of misunderstanding and vagueness about what really constitute the economics of the Belt and Road. Many people think it's about trade, it's about investments, it's about infrastructure, but there is something missing in understanding in a systematic way what also Stephen was talking about, physical economics, which has very little or nothing to do with money, finance, or trade per se. So it's our ambition to start this discussion and work with scholars, with experts and others to establish this, what we can call a Belt and Road economics science. It's not separated from economics, but it's economics as physical economics. So, and also the idea of the, unfortunately, we couldn't hear Professor Ding Yifan because he has his definition, what it means, what the high quality development in the Chinese sense means. But I will try to explain it in my own way, because there was certain things that are related to the history, the modern history of the world economy, which in a way forced that shift to the high quality development. Although the Chinese leadership has had a very long-term plan for the development of China, but there are certain things that happened. For example, the 2008 global financial crisis, which should have been the biggest wake-up call for the world, especially the Western world, but it was actually a wake-up call for China and its leaders to transit from a high-quantity, low-end economy to high-quality, upper-end, advanced industrial economy. Now, the world needs to learn from China's shift to this high-quality development process to understand the Belt and Road itself. So when the largest markets in the world, the United States and EU, collapsed in 2008, 2009, China was left standing alone with a big 40-foot container on its back. But China moved quickly to redeem itself of the burden of being the world's cheap factory. It has become, and continues to this date, the economic engine of the world. And we all should be grateful for that. I'm going to read a quote. You might guess who said this. It is, what is the purpose of economic development and what is the purpose of credit and money? It says, quote, to cherish and stimulate the activity of the human mind by multiplying the objects of enterprise is not among the least considerable of the expedients by which the wealth of a nation may be promoted, end of quote. Now, this is not Adam Smith, it's not Karl Marx. It is, as Professor Glendeeson mentioned, it's by one of the main founding fathers of the American Republic and the first Treasury Secretary, Finance Minister of the United States, Alexander Hamilton. He said this within his report on the subject of manufactures to the US Congress. And he argued that the purpose of issuing credit is to promote manufacturers in the new republic by stimulating the creative powers of its citizens. So creativity and the mind of the individual citizens is the most valuable asset of a nation's wealth. So I have had, and I advise people to read President Xi Jinping's speeches, the collections, there are 4 books like this, to really understand where China is going, how these concepts of economics, what are they based on? So one of the, I wrote a paper on the importance of redefining sustainable development. The term itself is conflicting because it means something different in China than we have in the West. Sustainable development, according to Xi Jinping, described in a speech which is titled A Deeper Understanding of the New Development Concepts, which he delivered on January 18, 2016. That he uses the term coordinated development, and he says this has acquired new features. This was 2016. He says, quote, coordinated development is the unity of weakness and potential in development. China is in a stage of transition from a middle-income country to a high-income country. According to international experience, this is a stage of concentrated conflicts of interest in which imbalanced development and various weaknesses are inevitable. To pursue coordinated development, we should identify and improve our weaknesses so as to tap development potential and sustain growth momentum. End of quote. In another speech in 2018, she thoroughly described the goals of development set out by him and by the Communist Party in China, and clearly explained his understanding of what he called the scientific outlook on development. In point 4 of his speech, which is titled Adopting a New Vision of Development, Xi Jinping said, quote, development is the underpinning and the key for solving our country's problems. We must pursue a model of sustainable development featuring increased production, higher living standards, and healthy ecosystems. End of quote. So rather than focusing on limited resources and how to divide them, which is the concept in the West about sustainable development, Xi Jinping often uses the metaphor of rather than fighting over a small cake or a pie, we should make the pie bigger or make many pies so everybody can get enough. So most of our indoctrinated so-called experts in the West would see this, what is Xi Jinping is saying, as a contradiction of terms, because they believe that increased production and raising the living standards causes ecological problem and will inevitably hit the wall of limited resources. Even more provocative to Western observers are Xi Jinping's repeated calls for the industrialization of Africa. In a speech he delivered at the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, the FOCAC, in Johannesburg, South Africa in 2015, Xi Jinping said, quote, industrialization is an inevitable path to a country's economic success. Within a short span of several decades, China has accomplished what took developed countries hundreds of years to accomplish, and put in place a complete industrial system with an enormous production capacity. It is entirely possible for Africa, as the world's most promising region in terms of development potential, to bring into play its advantages and achieve great success. The achievement of inclusive and sustainable development in Africa hinges on industrialization, which holds the key to creating jobs, eradicating poverty, and improving people's living standards. End of quote. Now, this is really provocative for people in the West to talk about Africa should be industrialized. We never hear any leader in the West talking about industrialization in Africa. We talk about adaptable technology and so on and so forth. So in a discussion also in 2015 with the CPC Central Committee, President Xi Jinping focused on the question of innovation. We in the West use the term creativity, but in China they use more the innovation. And he says innovative development focuses on the drivers of growth. Our ability to innovate is inadequate. Our science and technology is not fully developed. This is 2015, and is unable to create momentum to support economic and social development. This is the Achilles heel for such a big country as China. End of quote. So concerning the primacy of human creativity to the so-called natural resources, Xi Jinping stressed, quote, so we must consider innovation as the primary driving force of growth and the core in this whole undertaking, and human resources as a primary source to support development. We should promote innovation in theory, systems, science and technology, and culture, and make innovation the dominant theme in the work of the party and government and everyday activity of society, end of quote. So this is, we going back to the Alexander Hamilton's quote about the purpose of credit and money is to cherish the creative powers of the mind of the individual. This is the main source of, and my own work on economics generally is inspired by the work of Lyndon LaRouche, an American system economist. And he is actually, I worked with him before he passed away with the Schiller Institute. And actually we worked on, produced the first ever scientific study on the Eurasian land bridge, or the New Silk Road, which now everybody is familiar with. But this is in 1997 already. But the work of Lyndon LaRouche in establishing physical economics as a science, as different than the classical science, is very important to understand. I have his book translated myself to Arabic, So You Wish to Learn All About Economics, which I recommend for everybody to study, but also to study the Belt and Road and what is the economics of the Belt and Road. It's very important to study the work of Lyndon LaRouche and our Schiller Institute generally. Lyndon LaRouche developed a few ways of how scientific discoveries, which is incommensurable in a sense in an economy, how they change the dynamics of an economy. When you insert a new technology, when you discover a new principle in science, in nature, how does that affect the whole production process? Because it's incommensurable in that sense. So LaRouche uses specific metrics for measuring economic progress caused by scientific and even cultural progress. And one of these metrics is what he called the potential relative population density, which means how a society, a civilization can sustain not only the existing population, but the future growth of the population, the potential population in the future, using scientific, technological, and cultural discoveries and progress. So this is a very important metric. How many human beings can we sustain potentially using the technology we have today? And what technology do we need to develop to sustain even greater numbers of human beings? In the West, we think, too many people is a negative thing, LaRouche, and we don't believe in that sense. More human beings means more creative minds if we develop it. The other metric is, of course, LaRouche develops is the energy flux density. It's how much energy you can concentrate on a workplace. For example, how much using a laser, for example, which is a new technological discovery, to cut metals can both increase the efficiency, but also reduce the amount of energy used compared to using the traditional ways of cutting metals. So it's a paradox because you can concentrate the same amount of energy or even less on a much smaller area of work. So this is also a very important metric. So in that sense, the idea of scientific, technological discoveries and progress and the development of the mind of the individual must be primary in understanding economics. Not money, not natural resources, not trade, not power politics. So in a sense, so this is very important. An additional concept which need to be understood in addition to the potential relative population density and energy flux density is the idea of economic platforms. We should use the economic platform rather than infrastructure, because infrastructure is a diffuse, but the economic platform is very important concept to define the basis on which a society can function. And I think China, it represents a very good example, as I will show in my presentation, what an economic platform could mean. I hope this works now. Okay, I'm sorry that we couldn't hear Professor Ding Yifan Hopefully, we'll make it available on YouTube so people can watch it again. But he references, as I mentioned, President Xi Jinping in 2015 talked about the lack of innovation in economy, and then actually the idea of so-called Made in China 2025 was launched in 2015. By 10 years, within 10 years, China was planning to become a world leader in 10 main sectors: information technology, automated machine tools and robotics, aerospace and aeronautical equipment. That has been achieved, all these achieved. Maritime equipment and high-tech shipping. China is a world leader. Modern rail transport equipment. China is, again, a world leader. New energy vehicles and equipment. That's very well known. China is leading in the world. Power equipment for hydropower, for nuclear power, for coal power, and others. Agricultural equipment. China is becoming a world leader also in agricultural equipment. The new materials. China is a world leader in rare earth metals, refining and production. One of the sectors where still China is lagging behind is in the biotechnology and advanced medical products. So China has been capable 1 year ahead of time to accomplish all these shift from the low quality, high quantity economic industrial production to this high quality level. And it will have implications for the Belt and Road and development in Africa, Asia, and other parts of the world. One of the concepts which LaRouche develops when we have these maps of the new Silk Road, Belt and Road, what we have to think about is the idea of a development corridor. It's not, the railways are not to ship goods from China to Europe. It is useful for trade, but the concept should be to develop the areas between China and Europe, between A and B, what happens along the way. And therefore, this idea of the economic belt, the term President Xi used in 2013, is the idea of the development corridor, which is 100 to 150 meter wide corridor. At the center of it, either you have a river, water canals, high-speed rail, highways, oil and gas pipelines, electricity lines, and around them you build modern industrial and agricultural centers and urban centers. So this is the concept which should be promoted when we talk about the Belt and Road. It's a development initiative. It's not a trade initiative. Trade comes as a byproduct when we do these things. China itself had 3 main development corridors or belts, the Beijing-Tianjin belt corridor. We have the Greater Bay Area, which you have here in the, which is integrating all of Guangdong province into one large city, one large economy. The most important aspect of China's modernization and high quality development was to change. President Xi, in his speech I quoted, he talks about imbalanced development, because we had an enormous economic development in the coastal areas when China was opening up. All the industries were placed on the coastal areas, and that created enormous imbalance. While in the inland, you had still poverty and backwardness. So China shifted this policy by the policy of going west, the Western regions development strategy, and establishing these development corridors. And the Yangtze River corridor, which is like several thousand kilometers long, is a perfect example of this idea of a development corridor. I explain these things within my study, which I will publish soon as a video, on China's high-speed rail system development, why it is worth studying in terms of understanding economics, not understanding, how to make people travel easier and faster. It's an integrated part of China's physical economic development. So this is the same idea of the belt or the development corridor, around which we now have all these massive industrial cities in China, who have also become integral to the Belt and Road initiative. You have Chengdu, Chongqing, Changsha, Nanchang, Wuhan, Hefei, and so on and so forth, all the way to Beijing. So this is a perfect example, which is worth studying by other nations, because in other nations, we also have rivers, we have this type of corridors, but it's quite backward. So in that sense, understanding China's high-speed rail development should be seen in this light. And the economic platform with the high-speed rail system at its core. So this is a very interesting and also fascinating story. I'll just have to just read for you from my study of how China developed the high-speed rail, and the fact that this is not simply a very amazing, fascinating development, but if we look at how the China high-speed rail was started in 2002 and what it took to build the world's most advanced high-speed rail sector, the plan, brought together 6 super large companies, China's largest industrial companies, 25 universities, 11 scientific research institutes, 51 national laboratories and engineering centers, and a scientific and technological team composed of 68 academicians, 500 professors, and over 10,000 engineers and technicians. This is how China managed to absorb technology and build its own high-speed rail. Of course, they learned a lot from the Japanese Shinkansen technology and the German technology. So this understanding how the high-speed rail was built and what it took in terms of scientific, technological, and human resources to build is very important. As I said, I had the privilege of traveling a lot in China with using the high-speed rail, and hopefully I will manage to get this study done as a video. But this is mainly the concept. So we have here matched the Belt and Road corridors, mainly the land-based corridors, and matched it with our own, or from the Schiller Institute and Lyndon LaRouche's concept of the world land bridges. And these are all actually possible to build today with the existing technology, including connecting Asia to America across the Bering Strait. So this is the kind of perspective and understanding we need to have to understand the Belt and Road Initiative itself. As I said, China has a positive view of development in Africa, industrialization, but infrastructure and building the economic platform becomes crucial. But to understand the elements of developing a physical economy on a global scale requires understanding what we hope to develop as the Belt and Road economics. And we are having discussions with Chinese academicians and others to make this as a formal scientific branch of economics. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope I didn't take too much of the time.